Hi, everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage, and welcome back to another episode of Thyroid Shorts. The title of this one is The Thyroid Management Trap, Stuck in Thyroid Purgatory. So on today's Thyroid Short, I want to discuss how a lot of the current thyroid management strategies in both allopathic medicine and even integrated and functional medicine can trap you in a state that I call thyroid purgatory. So, have you ever felt stuck in a medical, let's call it twilight zone, where you're told that your labs look good, your doctor's happy, but you still don't feel like yourself. You don't feel normal or optimal, whatever term your doctor uses. Um, you definitely don't feel healthy. And this is that state where you're a little bit better, but you're not well. And I call it thyroid purgatory. So let me give you a fuller definition. So thyroid purgatory to me is this frustrating state where the labs the doctor is looking at have been manipulated into their normal range, and some would say their optimal range. And this indicates to them that their strategy is working. But your body is telling you a different story. Maybe your symptoms are a little bit better, but they're still present. Uh, you're stuck somewhere between where you were, which wasn't great, and between where you want to be. You're stuck between this kind of illness state and well-being. You're managed, but you're not recovered. Does this sound like you? If it does, that's what we're going to talk about, why this occurs in this Thyroid Short podcast. So let me tell you about a patient of mine, Angie. And this story may resonate with you. Angie was diagnosed hypothyroid, and initially Angie was diagnosed with not having hypothyroidism because the original doctor she went to see looked at her TSH. Her TSH was actually low, not high. So her doctor said, "You don't have hypothyroidism. Your TSH is low. It should be high if you're hypothyroid. So make some diet lifestyle changes, eat less, exercise more, maybe take an antidepressant." And Angie went off. Eventually, a couple of years later, still frustrated, still super symptomatic. Finally, she was diagnosed with hypothyroidism by her medical physician, put on T4, and the doctor said that she was normal because that medication had brought her TSH into range. But she didn't feel normal. And so she went to another endocrinologist, and they looked at her labs and said, "Hey, these labs look good. You're on the right dose." They tinkered maybe with increasing the dose a little bit to see if it would improve her symptoms, but it never really made her feel better. And as the dose of the thyroid medication went up, she would get more hyperthyroid symptoms and hypothyroid symptoms. So she was really frustrated. So eventually she went into the integrative or functional medicine space. And those doctors did a bit more thorough panel. They added T3 to what she was doing. So they switched her from T4 only to NP thyroid. That seemed to work, but it didn't get rid of all her symptoms. So she was still in this thyroid purgatory. She felt a little bit better, but didn't feel normal. So they tried increasing the dose, decreasing the dose. They changed from Armour to NP thyroid. One doctor even added some additional T3 to the glandular product, and still frustrated, still in this thyroid purgatory state. And what she found with taking both T4 and T3 in this integrative or functional model was very similar to the medical model, where she was, where if she increased the dose of medication, she would get more hyperthyroid symptoms and she'd get some hypothyroid symptoms. But she would also, but she couldn't go down either, because if she went down in the dose, she didn't feel good. So they're always kind of playing with the values. She was better, but never optimized, despite what her physicians were telling her. So she was stuck in thyroid management purgatory. So why does this happen? The primary reason it happens is because what most clinicians don't take into consideration, and what most people don't know, is that we typically operate in one of two states with our physiology. We're either operating in a low stress state, we call homeostatic regulation, where we make enough energy to do everything we need to do, and thyroid hormone physiology works the way we want it to. Or two, we operate from this excessive stress state that we call allostasis. So we make less energy than we need, and the body has to, or we're under excessive stress, and the body says, hey, we need to slow down the physiology. We need to shift resources to the more important systems that are that can help protect us and find the threat, find the danger, and deal with it. And most clinicians don't take that into consideration. The second big reason that thyroid purgatory happens is that many times physicians are looking at very limited pictures of somebody's physiology. They're only looking at a TSH and maybe a free T4, so they're not seeing the big picture. Maybe they're running a fuller thyroid panel like you'll see by some integrative practitioners, or maybe they're only looking at free hormones and TSH. Even in functional medicine, they may be looking at free hormones, TSH, and total hormones, but they're not looking at the rest of the metabolic panel. They're not looking for inflammatory markers. They're not looking at cholesterol and blood sugar markers and liver. We're not understanding how thyroid affects those things. So because they're running limited labs, they're getting a limited view of your physiology and a limited understanding of what's going on. The third reason is that when physicians, sometimes both in allopathic and functional medicine, see your thyroid gland not producing sufficient thyroid hormone, they assume that your physiology is broken, that you've lost the ability for your thyroid gland to make hormones. So they feel that the only strategy is to give you T4. From a functional or integrative side of it, they may, again, look at your thyroid physiology and say, oh, your thyroid gland's not making hormone, you've got an immune or autoimmune condition, and assume that that's going to damage the gland and you're not going to be able to make T4. So they too are going to give you T4. They may take it a step further and say, hey, we're not just going to give you T4, your thyroid gland makes T3 too, so we're going to give you a little bit of T3, or we're going to give you a lot of T3, because they look at that fuller panel and they see that you're not able to convert T4 to T3 very well, and they assume that that piece is broken and that you lost the ability to convert T4 to T3. They see the immune inflammatory thing and assume the immune system is broken, and so they want to give you things to suppress the immune system and antibodies. Both when somebody is managing your thyroid physiology, not considering the operating mode, looking at limited labs, and assuming that your physiology is broken and not adapting to something, then they're forced to management strategies. They're forced to try and manipulate or manage the blood values into a certain range. Medical physicians will use the standard lab range. Integrative or functional practitioners who use T3 will try and get the lab values typically into what they've concocted as their optimal range. And these strategies can restore blood values. They absolutely can do that. They can even change your symptoms, improve your symptoms a bit. Sometimes for the good, sometimes they create negative symptoms, but they rarely restore well-being. And that's the challenge. And that's why many times you are stuck in this thyroid purgatory where you're frustrated, where your doctor's saying, hey, it looks great, look normal, looks optimal, but your body doesn't feel that way. So why does this happen? The reason this happens is because the abnormal lab value that your doctor sees on your lab report is not the problem. It's a sign of a problem. It's an indicator telling us that, hey, T4 and T3 are low and TSH is high. Something's causing the thyroid gland to lose its functionality. When that's where we need to make a decision. Is this just broken physiology, which is what is assumed by those who like a management strategy, or is an adaptive response to something going on in the body, which is my philosophy and the philosophy of many who adopt what I'm going to talk about from a thyroid recovery standpoint. But because the thyroid, the damage to the gland and the reduced conversion of T4 to T3 isn't the real problem, it's a sign of a problem. If you just provide medication to increase blood levels, but never address what caused those lab values to be abnormal, how are you going to achieve well-being? You need to address the real issue, what caused the thyroiditis, what caused the thyroid gland damage, what's causing the increased conversion of T4 to reverse T3, what's causing the reduced conversion of T4 to T3, what's causing lower levels of T3 in the cells and tissues, which is resulting in your signs and symptoms. So what is causing the real problem? For most people, the cause of hypothyroidism, the cause of their gland damage, the cause of poor T4 to T3 conversion, the cause of increased reverse T3, the cause of elevated thyroid antibodies is not broken physiology, at least at the onset. Instead, it is an appropriate adaptive response to excessive stress on their physiology. And when you have excessive stress on your physiology, your body works differently. Initially, I talked about the two operating states. When we're in a low stress homeostatic state, the thyroid physiology is in a homeostatic thyroid state or operating mode. We feel good, we function good, we make lots of energy, we sleep good, we don't store a lot of excess calories as fat, we have all the energy to do everything we want to do. But when we put excessive stress on the physiology, our bodies have to adapt. And we shift from homeostatic regulation to this high stress allostatic state. And to do that, we also have to shift our thyroid physiology from homeostatic regulation to allostatic regulation. So when there's excessive stress load on the physiology, your body and your thyroid physiology shift into this high stress regulatory state. This results in increased inflammation, increased immune activity, decreased metabolism, and unfortunately, it can result in a lot of symptoms. For some, this excessive stress state, the shift from homeostasis into allostatic regulation occurs suddenly. They know there's this big trauma, this big pressure, this big trigger that does it. But for a lot of us, it winds up being this slow, gradual process. There's no like life-changing moment that we're aware of that triggered this change in our physiology. Instead, it's this slow, gradual process. But what's important to understand is this change from homeostatic to allostatic regulation, this isn't broken physiology, it's adaptive. And so the decreased thyroid gland production, the decreased T4 to T3 conversion, this isn't broken physiology as many people think it is. It is an adaptive change. And the challenge here is if it is an adaptive change and we come in and provide more medication to a system that doesn't want it, it may become problematic. And so while you don't feel well in this allostatic regulatory mode, you're not broken. Your body, your nervous system has detected excessive stress, excessive threat, and it's now taking steps to protect you. It activates what we call the cell danger response, which increases immune and inflammatory systems. It results in decreased metabolism and downregulation of the less important systems to survival. Decreasing your thyroid conversion and decreasing thyroid gland production may be critical processes, or I should say are critical processes to this protective adaptive response. So taking thyroid medication to optimize blood levels without taking into consideration your operating state or assuming you are in homeostasis is what leads to thyroid purgatory. It may improve your symptoms a bit, but will never restore wellness if you're in an excessive stress state. And there are people who are in homeostasis. They get medication. It works the way they want it to. They feel fantastic. They're on a stable dose, 25, 50 micrograms of T4. Maybe they're on a very small dose of Armor. All their signs and symptoms go away. They feel good. They function good. They maintain normal weight. That's great. The reason their dose of medication worked is probably because they figured out how to get themselves back into a homeostatic system, and the gland just wasn't ready or hadn't fully recovered, so they needed some thyroid medication support. But most of you, especially if you're listening to this podcast, are likely not in homeostasis. That's why this treatment strategy you've used in the past, you're currently using, still changes your labs, but it doesn't really restore health and well-being. Too often, this management strategy where we're trying to manipulate the labs into the range and not address the root issue leads to frustration from the provider, leads to frustration for you, the client. And what it leads to for you as the patient, as the client, is you get frustrated with one practitioner because they think you're normal. You don't feel normal, so you go to a different maybe a different medical practitioner. They run the same labs, they use the same medications, they try different doses, but you don't get to where you want to get to. Maybe you find a different provider in integrative or functional medicine who now adds T3 to the picture. Maybe they shift you from T4 to Armor or NP thyroid. They tried increasing and decreasing doses. Maybe you wind up going to see somebody who adds additional T3 to the Armor or NP thyroid to try and optimize the T3. And when that doesn't work, maybe you go to somebody who says, hey, we're just going to try and do this with T3 only. Regardless of which strategies you've used, and maybe you've used all of them, they all can change your signs and symptoms, but they never restore well-being. They never restore thyroid physiology. They just manage and manipulate it, leaving you stuck in this thyroid purgatory and frustrated. So what's the solution? I'll give you a brief overview today and cover this in greater detail on future Thyroid Short episodes. But here is what I do with my clients to try and help get them out of this thyroid purgatory. Number one, we need to determine what they want. Are they looking for more of a management strategy? Hey, I don't want to change anything about diet or lifestyle. I don't want to look for the underlying cause of what created some of this stuff. What I really want to do is I just want to try and find a magic dose of thyroid medication that's going to fix me. If they're in allostasis, that's not going to happen. And so that may be a patient that either I've got to make sure I explain the difference between thyroid management and thyroid recovery. And if they still want a management strategy, I usually send them back to their provider. If they want thyroid recovery, which is what I help people do, then we get busy with the next step. We then need to determine if they are in an allostatic state, which most of them are, which is why the medications haven't really gotten them well. It's only kept them in this better kind of thyroid purgatory state. So we need to determine that whether they're in this thyroid allostatic state and what's causing this excessive cell stress state, this cell danger state that's triggering the immune inflammatory process, decreasing thyroid gland function and decreasing conversion. We need to make sure that their thyroid replacement strategy is appropriate for their state. We don't want to try to optimize them as if they're in homeostasis when they're not. We want to make sure that their thyroid replacement supports somebody in an allostatic state so that we're not over medicating them and inhibiting their ability to heal and recover. We want to then work on eliminating or reducing the stressors that are triggering this cell stress, cell danger response, and this shift to allostasis. And as we do these things, we also need to support the recovery of key systems that may have become dysfunctional while they've been in this allostatic state for a period of time, months, years, maybe decades. Some of those key systems, the GI system, the liver and detoxification pathways, the adrenal system, the sex hormone physiology. We need to make sure we support the recovery of these systems. As we're working on reducing these stressors, supporting the recovery of the tissues and shifting somebody from allostatic to homeostatic regulation, we need to continually monitor their thyroid hormone replacement so that the dose is always one that's supportive of thyroid gland recovery and T4 to T3 conversion. In time, what I've seen after doing this for 22 to 3 decades, 3 decades now, is that most people, if we follow this strategy, this script, most people need less medication than they're taking. It converts better. And many people following the strategy not only need less medication that works better, but many in time don't need any at all. So if you are in your own thyroid purgatory and you want to see what can be done to help you, go to my website, www.rejuvegencenter.com, and schedule a complimentary discovery call, and we can discuss how to get you out of your thyroid purgatory. All right. Hope this helps. Stay tuned for more Thyroid Short episodes on the Thyroid Answer podcast and more long-form versions of the Thyroid Answers podcast. Thank you.